this video. This video should prove to be a bit of a challenge, a tiff between James Lindsay and Sargon, two names I'm sure that need no introduction. So Sargon, English liberal, and James Lindsay, who blew up the internet sphere for his anti-woke academic perspectives, and whilst he calls himself liberal, if you scratch below the surface, yeah, he's really just woke-lite. A perspective he doesn't like at all because, well, liberalism is his pet project, and when someone points out it's doomed to produce the very thing he supposedly rallies against, yeah, he tends to react very, very badly to that. The man is utterly incapable of taking any criticism, especially from the right. Why anyone thinks he's a dissident figure is frankly beyond me. We have to potentially discuss political theory, so I have to make this interesting and not bore you guys and myself as I go through all of this, so oh goody, what great joy. Now, what kicked all of this off? Simple. Owen McIntyre, a man I suspect James Lindsay would never face off with in a million years because Owen would wipe the floor with him. And yes, I'm aware my bias is projecting harder than a military parade on the 4th of July, but don't worry, I always do bring my receipts. So Owen McIntyre said this: DEI isn't some crazy form of communism, though its proponents are often neo-Marxists. DEI is the natural evolution of civil rights law. That's why it was able to take hold so easily, and until you are willing to unwind that leviathan, this is the world you will live in. Needless to say, Sargon agreeing with this, even extending, saying communism isn't separate from liberalism though. James did not take too well to that, even going so far as to block Sargon, with Carl saying the following: I consider this an open admission that James can't substantiate his argument. I have never once insulted James. In fact, I have defended him many times. In our discussion, I pointed out that many people are often emotionally attached to liberalism in an unhealthy way. Seems relevant. Now, personally, I find Harry Robinson from the Odysee decimation of the scuffle the best one, both amusing and succinct. Carl respectfully disagrees with James Lindsay. James, and I took that personally. What a clown you are. Liberals always side with communists when push comes to shove. This was motivated by Owen McIntyre pointing out correctly that DEI is an extension of the Civil Rights Act, and Lindsay starts throwing pissy fits over his sacred cow being criticized. Fundamentally unserious. Men like Lindsay have no solutions to our problems. He is a snake oil salesman who wants to sell you a complicated, fancy explanation of wokeness as French post-constructional fetish theory while ignoring the legal and social framework that powers woke. Ignore. A good an explanation as any as to why I call him Woke-Lite, so bravo to Harry, I tip my hat to you, good sir. Now, why is Sargon saying this? Well, naturally, this is the American perspective of liberalism, so the Lockean form, which inspired America's constitutional framework, is at play here. So Sargon did a good breakdown some years back called 5 False Assumptions of Liberalism. I won't get too much into them here because I want to keep this video as bare bone as I can, but his 5 points are as follows: pre-social man in the state of nature, everyone is equal, the universal man, the blank slate, and equality of opportunity. It's a good read. Sargon's a quality writer, and I find his words to be more proficient when it's put to paper, so I'll put a link to it down below. But the conversation gets a bit more interesting when V comes in, saying the following. Also, Sargon, if you want to get purely philosophical, the state of nature, as mentioned by John Locke, includes property. As such, communism is antithetical to this definition, as it must remove their property, often by harming the person as well as its liberty should they refuse. So as I said before, I was critical of Sargon and I took V's position, so now let's flip the script and I'll side with Sargon this time around. Also, you will notice I tend to avoid labels in my own videos for precisely this reason, because when people use labels, they tend to do away with its capacity to get contorted. More often than not, they apply it with rigidity, the latter of which never makes any sense to me because it's rarely ever absolute. It's always more flexible because you're dealing with the opinions and perspectives of other human beings. And more often than not, the conversation tends to spiral off and people end up arguing more about the definitions and effects and effectiveness, and I get very bored and fall asleep rather easily. I don't think V is entirely wrong. He's on the right track, but he comes off, a tad inconsistent. Maybe. I do believe he's got all the right ingredients, though. Everyone seems to have a valid point, so let's see if I can bridge the gap here. Now, V fires off a series of tweets. I've picked the most applicable ones. Hopefully, I don't do my friend a disservice by posting them in a timely manner. Communism is a reaction to religion, it is a reaction to human greed, a reaction to the concept of aristocracy, a reaction to war. Like if you read the manifesto, you would see it can be used as a reaction to almost everything because it's a solution for every problem. It is a very simplistic way to say that communism is a reaction to liberalism. It doesn't need liberalism, nor is it a reaction to it. My country was a monarchy and we got communism. Take into account that in China or Soviet Russia, you didn't have a free society, and yet you got communism. Communism as an ideology doesn't care about the political ruling of the nation state. It creates a revolution and overthrows the order. Seems a bit strange to say my country was a monarchy and we got communism, but also say communism as an ideology doesn't care about the political rulings of the nation state. Now keep in mind, this entire ordeal kicked off about liberalism leading to communism. It's happening in the West right now. We are not monarchical, unfortunately, and as V pointed out, it happened under monarchical rule as well. They both appear to be right, so logically there must be some underlying variable that encompasses both of their views. Now, in order to solve this problem, I'm going to attempt to do away with communism's underpinnings and just debunk why it's nonsensical bollocks in under 60 seconds, a TLDR, if you will. Communists believe in a classless society, equality above all else. Let's be real, class is basically synonymous with hierarchy. We're mammals, and hierarchy is natural. So ultimately, they want something that is utterly unnatural and antithetical to not only all of human history, but also nature, because nothing in nature is ever equal. And in order to make something equal, you need something to force the equality, which would obviously require power above everyone else imposing its will, and therefore violates the having no class idealism upon which communism is supposedly based on. So to sum up, their utopian vision is sheer lunacy, an impossible mess of a pipe dream. So is it any surprise why it's always resulted in death and decay? No, not really. So with that information, let's bridge the gap here, shall we? Because V actually pointed it out. It creates a revolution and overthrows the order. Hierarchy is order, and as he said, it doesn't care about the political rulings of the nation state. And if you know leftism, its primary driver is envy, wanting something that someone else has, aka possessing a form of power. Look at that list you had up there a moment ago. Communism is a reaction to religion, to human greed, to the concept of aristocracy, a reaction to war. What do all four of those things have in common? They're all forms of power. The power to impose morality, the power to create or take capital, the power to influence, and the power to mobilize men and declare the legitimacy of an armed conflict. If you have the power to do any of that, you have a hierarchy. And you will have this in any and all societies because we are hierarchical by nature. That will come into being in any society, just from a structural perspective. The monarchical one has the peasants, the merchants, the knights, the lords, the clergy, the princes, and the kings. Our oligarchical one still has the peasantry, or citizens as we're called now, but the business owners, the military, celebrities, members of parliament, congressmen, CEOs, and of course the most evil people on earth, bankers. Every society has its elite. It just depends on its criteria. And if you want to dig a little bit deeper, this is why meritocracy is complete BS. And if you've just realized, wait, doesn't that mean the emergence of this type of revolt is a present danger in any society? Indeed, because it's ultimately nothing more than revolt against mammalian reality. It's why you have to be completely insane to believe any of this kind of rubbish. But I want to pull up a response to Sargon's 5 False Assumptions of Liberalism by Helen Pluckrose. She is the co-author of James Lindsay's book, Cynical Theories. We'll look at some of it in just a few moments. This is what she said in response to Sargon. Pre-social man in a state of nature. No idea what this means. I'm not familiar with these philosophers apart from Hobbes. Sargon's list of philosophers include Grotius, Locke, Hobbes, Rousseau, and Montesquieu. And yet the only one she's familiar with is Hobbes. You're a liberal expert here, people. Imagine calling yourself a liberal scholar and you've never read Locke. That's like calling yourself a builder but you've never heard or seen bricks and mortar. In any sane society, this should instantly disqualify you from ever engaging in this topic because you're hopelessly out of your depth. By the way, she got more in the comment section for pointing all this out. 2. Everyone is equal. This is a claim my word woman learned to proofread. The liberals believe that hierarchy is not natural to humans and always a construct of power. They're both. Without which everybody would do equally well. No, some leftists think like this, but meritocracy is the guiding principle in liberalism. Now watch how fast she 180s this into a ditch. Liberals oppose hierarchies like class systems, patriarchy, or racial segregation, but not people attaining leadership positions through merit. I want you all to pause and recognize the colossal amount of sheer stupidity in that statement. I actually can't believe anyone is daft enough to say that out loud. Attain leadership positions through merit. The military forces, if you went by merit, would be only men, yet an institution of oppressive patriarchy by your liberal frame. Nature is not fair, but society is still best served by having people who are best at things lead those things. I'll never make a rugby player, thank God for that. We can't make everybody equally gifted at everything. No shit. All we can do is, one, ensure that nobody is held back from rising to the top on their own merits, changing systems so that women and people of racial minority can go to universities and enter professions where liberal developments, and two, ensure that people who end up at the bottom in a meritocratic society have a decent standard of living and fulfilling work. So we want the best person, hooray for meritocracy, until it produces disparities that we don't like, in which case we'll just call for a change in the system. If you think this is bad, we're gonna make it even worse. This is from their book, a section called Principled Opposition Example 1. We affirm that racism remains a problem in society and needs to be addressed. We deny that critical race theory and intersectionality provide the most useful tools to do so, since we believe that racial issues are best solved through the most rigorous analysis possible. We contend that racism is defined as prejudiced attitudes and discriminatory behavior against individuals or groups on the grounds of race and can be successfully addressed as such. We deny that racism is hard-baked into society via discourses, that it is unavoidable and present in every interaction to be discovered and called out, and that this is part of a ubiquitous systemic problem that is everywhere, always, and all-pervasive. We deny that the best way to deal with racism is by restoring social significance to racial categories and radically heighten their salience. We contend that each individual can choose not to hold racist views and should be expected to do so. You have a choice, but not really, because you're expected not to. By who? And why? And what exactly is my penalty if I don't? I hope you all realize the concept of self-preservation doesn't exist in their worldview. The racism is declining over time and becoming rarer, that we can and should see one another as humans first and members of a certain race second, that issues of race are best dealt with by being honest about racialized experiences while still working towards shared goals and a common vision, and that the principle of not discriminating by race should be universally upheld. Cynical theories how activist scholarships made everything about race, gender, and identity. Be honest, does any of this sound like opposition to you at all? No. No, it doesn't, because they aren't opposition. Like I said, they aren't anti-woke, they're just woke-lite. A revolt against reality, and these people want to revolt against just enough reality to fit their ideological worldview. But they have absolutely no clue how to turn off the spigot and keep it from going into overdrive and into the poison form they claim to rally against. These people are so desperate to use whatever means they can to hide the nakedly obvious and avoid conversations about observable reality because it makes them very, very uncomfortable and sweat bullets. Any rational person will tell you, the more advanced a civilization becomes, the more the disparities between the lagging groups will show. Everyone knows if you went full-blown colorblind mode, which two demographics would dominate society, and these types would scramble like rats if you pressed them on Y, and they bloody well know it. It's funny that James thinks Sargon is wrong, yet his own writings prove Sargon is right on the frickin' money. One thing you will notice about Lindsay is he absolutely hates Christianity with a passion. So a quote I have for you all from Cortez. There are only two possible forms of control, one internal and the other external, religious control and political control. They are of such a nature that when the religious barometer rises, the barometer of political control falls, and likewise, when the religious barometer falls, the political barometer, that is political control and tyranny, rises. That is the law of humanity, a law of history. If civilized man falls into disbelief and immorality, the way is prepared for some gigantic and colossal tyrant, universal and immense. To accompany this, I'll leave you all with the following from Aristophanes on Twitter. The thing about liberals, which Lindsay almost certainly is that they are pants-shittingly afraid of any collective group that has convictions. They will switch sides constantly and play the middleman because their only conviction is that they should be in charge. Historically speaking, this worldview always gets shoved in the eventuality. They believe in some kind of divine mandate of their leadership because they mistake being moderate for being nuanced and enlightened. The problem with this is without convictions, there are no real priorities or goals for governance. This void of action makes conditions deteriorate and leads to graft and corruption filling that void. The one thing they excel at is acting as a fulcrum that pits both sides of the political spectrum against each other to do the dirty work of propping up that rule. When one side becomes too strong, the liberal will change sides, pushing its opposite into primacy to weaken their former allies. Imagine a game of Monopoly where every time two other players are discussing a trade or a decision, and you always offer advice that's sincere and helpful, but is designed to create the result that weakens whichever side of the trade is stronger. If you've made it this far, I assume you don't need me to spell it out for you. Cheers for watching, and once again, I apologize for nothing.